Conclave continues, or pre-conclave continues anyway. And I would be remiss if I didn't start with a bit of news that I think people are taking too seriously. They're taking it as if this is a definitive thing that's changed the game entirely. Anybody who tells you they know who the next pope is going to be is lying to themselves, or they're gaslighting you. I will assume that they're just lying to themselves. It's more charitable. But I would be remiss if we didn't start here. Diane Montagna, journalist, independent journalist who resides in Rome, it seems, and has given some of the worst elements of the Roman Curia the hard time they deserve and asked them the hard questions that they deserve to be asked that no one else was asking, reported this. Just in, according to multiple sources, yesterday afternoon, an alert was triggered in the Vatican concerning the health of former Vatican Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is considered one of the leading papal contenders. The 70-year-old cardinal reportedly suffered a sudden illness due to elevated blood pressure and was attended to by a medical team that assisted him for an hour. The incident was reported by an Italian journalist, and they gives you the source on it. A lot of people were saying as a consequence of that, oh, he's out, he's done. Not necessarily. Okay, first and foremost, that could become a selling point for him. One of the things conventional wisdom says that the more conservative element and some of the moderates that Parolin has been trying to get to his side, and I know that sounds insane saying that he's, conservative and moderate. He is not, but the coalition he's building has a lot of that element in it. One of the things they might want is a shorter pontificate. That is a recurring theme we hear from them, is a shorter pontificate. Also, boy, was that convenient. Boy, is that convenient to have him having a health scare like that. Numerous voices, including much more moderate voices than myself, pointed out that boy, is that so convenient, in fact, that if this was the Middle Ages, you would expect that this was an attempt of some kind of foul play, and that they would be bringing in experts in alchemy and things to take a look at what might have happened, as if some nefarious type was trying to remove him from the equation. I know, that's what that sounds like. Vatican politics, excuse me, makes most court politics in monarchies seem reasonable by comparison. Thank you for becoming a member, Rockstar J. It is appreciated. As a general reminder, channel members get a free super chat. I think it's once a month for any channel you're on. Basically, every membership you have, you get for that channel. You get a free super chat once a month. Use it, please use it. YouTube gives that to you. You should use any resource they give you. Now that having been said, we are going to talk about today a figure who, for some people, most people needs an introduction, because he is a notorious figure in some circles. I don't have a really good picture of him up here, but his name is, this is a cardinal who is the kind of man who would make Pastor Jimmy Martin of the Jesuit Church absolutely prance with glee while singing Over the Rainbow if he was the one who emerged from the loggia. His name is Cardinal Jose Tolentino de Mendoza, or Tolentino is usually how you're going to hear him referred to. Notorious figure. And yesterday, the Remnant I covered, or the day before yesterday they reported, but I covered it yesterday. The Remnant covered how there are two factions really starting to coalesce, according to their generally trustworthy sources. Take it with a grain of salt what they're saying, all conclave reporting. But there are two factions forming. Conservative types rallying around Parolin, not because they like Parolin, but because compared to Tolentino, Parolin is relatively moderate. He's not a moderate. He is definitely a Bergoglian modernist type, but Tolentino's light years worse than him. And the conservative and moderate element in the hierarchy know they can at least work to some degree with Parolin if they get concessions from him. Tolentino is another story altogether. This is a guy who would be an absolute nightmare if made the Roman pontiff. I'm going to go talk to you today a little bit about this man and go over a few articles about him. Things may change. I'm not saying he will be Pope. A totally other figure could emerge on the loggia that day. Nobody knows who's going to be the Pope except the most blessed Trinity. No one else knows. Here's a little bit about him. This guy has he is almost out of central casting for a progressive Pope. So Cardinal Jose Tolentino Mendoza, his birthday, like Francis, is in December. He was born in 1965. This is going to be your first Pope who wasn't even around for Vatican II. Vatican II ended days before he was born. Okay, so this will be your first totally post-conciliar Pope. He's from Portugal. He is a prelate, a poet, a theologian, and is considered an intellectual, and is considered also a leading figure in the Roman Curia. He is the son of a fisherman, and it gives his story a certain poetry to it if he were to become Pope. He was ordained a priest in 1990 and pursued further studies in Rome, obtaining a licentiate in biblical sciences from the Pontifical Bible Institute in 1992 and a doctorate in biblical theology from the Catholic University of Portugal in 2004. He's got interest in the Gospel of Luke, and a lot of modernists love certain stories from there. And in this case, it was the encounter between Jesus and the sinful woman. He's published a lot. He's like Fernandez, written a lot of poetry, essays, plays, and all sorts of other things. And he's actually gotten a lot of acclaim as a writer in Portugal. His ecclesiastical career is noteworthy. He has served as the Pontifical Council he served as a consultor to the Pontifical Council for Culture from 2011, meaning Benedict put him up there, to 2018. Was appointed archivist and librarian of the Holy Roman Church in 2018. In 2022, Pope Francis named him prefect of the Dicastery for Culture and Education, a role that merged the former Congregation for Catholic Education and Pontifical Council for Culture. He was elevated to cardinal by Pope Francis on October 5th, 2019, and joined the Third Order of St. Dominic in 2020. His ties to culture make him attractive in the same way that Taglay is attractive. Taglay has this ability to interact with the secular culture in ways that the rest of us can't even wrap our head around. He just tends to make a clown of himself most of the time he does it, and this is not what Tolentino is going to be doing. He's also held memberships in several Vatican dicasteries, including the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, Dicastery for Bishops, Dicastery for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, and Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. His cultural engagements include commissioning the Vatican Pavilion at the 2024 Venice Biennale, held in a women's prison, and organizing a 2023 meeting between Pope Francis and 200 cultural figures in the Sistine Chapel. He has on paper a lot of the administrative skills and, well, the CV or resume of somebody you would want to have managing large-scale operations in the church. Here he is on some key controversial issues, and we'll go pivot back and forth between a couple of articles when we do this. Let's first start with something near and dear to my heart and the hearts of many of you, his attitude towards the traditional Latin Mass. This is from several news articles here. He says that it's basically, the way I summarize this here is saying in the following way. Cardinal Tolentino is not aligned with the traditional liturgical movements, and he shows no sympathy whatsoever for the TLM. His perspective is rooted in the so-called reforms of the Second Vatican Council, and the way he looks at it as the so-called reforms is the normal way of looking at the church and the world for his generation. He has criticized a so-called conservative wing within the church, including some cardinals, for prioritizing traditionalism above tradition, suggesting a preference for post-Vatican II liturgical norms over pre-conciliar practices. He's one of these men who will frame the changes to the new mass made to the liturgical life of the Latin rite of the church as a restoration of ancient worship, which is nonsense. There's literally no evidence whatsoever that things you see in the Novus Ordo are in any way, shape, or form found in the most earliest Christian communities. You just don't find it there. Now, there are some things about this man that I'm going to turn to Anne Barnhart here for. And what she says here, first I'll actually start here, is reflected in this article that's paywalled by Damian Thompson, The Search for the Next Pope Turning Ugly. It's from 2 years ago, so she's not making this up. I know a lot of you may not like Anne Barnhart or agree with her take on Benedict XVI and Francis and all of that. But I'm going to warn you, she uses some incredibly spicy language here, stuff that will get me kicked off this platform. So I will be sanitizing her language here. And as you will see, just from her headline, told you, anti-Pope Bergoglio's new #1 pet redacted, now made a cardinal. This is from 2018. Let's go over his background together in a less scandalous way than she does. Again, she calls Francis an anti-pope. You don't have to agree with her on that, whatever. Quoting this as verbatim as I can. Anti-Pope Bergoglio, loving to surround himself with James Martin types, as any red-blooded, God-fearing, naturally inclined man does, yes, that's sarcasm, just appointed the odious James Martin type Mendoza the head of the Vatican Library and Archives. With this promotion, he was elevated and made a titular archbishop just a few days ago, July 28th. He is an open, active, highly active James Martin type and huge activist of the James Martin crowd. His wretched life of open, sacrilegious sins that cry out to heaven for justice was so bad that the people in his hometown of Madeira, Portugal, drove him out of town on a rail. But wait, it gets worse. This past February, guess who anti-Pope Bergoglio chose to be the preacher and spiritual guide at his 2018 papal Lenten retreat? A huge feather in the cap and clear endorsement. Yup, the radical James Martin type activist, Jose Tolentino Mendoza. Now, anti-Pope Bergoglio has followed through and brought his new favorite redacted lapdog to be close to him in Rome. And then it goes to a LifeSite article that goes over some of his errors, and we will definitely touch on that in just a moment. Again, the man has the resume to be Pope. He's got the background that's almost out of central casting. He's the son of a fisherman. Do I have to illustrate for you why that is like practically perfect from a storytelling perspective, to have the man who not only from like this sort of modern class consciousness nonsense stuff, but the son of a fisherman to become the fisherman? You can't make it up. So here's what he has to say about the James Martin sin and those who embrace that sin. He advocates for a welcoming and merciful church, particularly for marginalized groups. Red flag there, secularized language, including especially James Martin types. He has expressed support for inclusive pastoral approaches, emphasizing the church as a space where all, including James Martin types, can find mercy and be heard. He wrote a preface for a book by a woman named Sister Teresa Forcades. She is a notorious woman religious who has been accused of witchcraft. She is also a proponent of a strange theology, and she defends the sacrifice to Moloch the secularists love so much, loves other religions more than Catholicism, every single thing that tells you that she's an apostate in a habit. And yet he praises her. He wrote a foreword for her book. He praised her approach to challenging dogmatic norms and fostering alternative interpretations, suggesting Christianity's future depends on addressing suppressed voices, including those related to marital activities. Now, some of his critics, such as Abbe Claude Barth, argue that this reflects a modernist shift towards a post-Catholicism that embraces secular values, and that's putting it mildly. This guy is like everything bad about Fernandez and everything bad about Supich and McElroy rolled into one, because he's also one of the sharpest minds in the church. Remember when I told you that my nightmare is McElroy? This guy might be worse, or at least as bad, because Francis relied on his charisma and his just ruthlessness when governing Rome. This guy clearly has charisma, but he's also hyper intelligent. It is a dangerous combination. He's also a strong proponent of synodality, viewing it as a defining feature of the church's future. He praises Pope Francis's vision for the Synod on Synodality, which he believes fosters open dialogue and communion. He sees synodality as vital for the church's engagement with the world, aligning with Francis's emphasis on a participatory listening church. Tolentino represents a faction aligned with Supich, McElroy, and their European counterparts, Hollerich, Gresh, all those figures. Tolentino is their candidate. And again, go back to what I was telling you about Parolin. I'm not a fan of Parolin. I think he's not that much better than this guy. But the National Catholic Reporter were one of the big ones pushing the idea that Parolin was out because of his health scare, and people just lapped it up. The National Catholic Reporter is aligned with McElroy and Supich in that faction. They're aligned with the Tolentino faction. It's not hard to figure these things out quickly. Same with American Magazine. What it looks like we're watching here is Do you want a rhetorically, meaning in terms of how he speaks, milder version of Francis as Pope? There's Parolin, or a rhetorically milder version of Francis who was worse than Francis and Tolentino. That's what it looks like. Again, key phrase, that's what it looks like. No one knows who is going to step out on that loggia. And to their credit right now, Rorate Caeli has an article you should look at. It's got too many names to go over here, but it's a list of all the bad Papabile candidates that if you saw one of them step out onto the loggia next Thursday, next Friday, whenever it happens, you would know that you need to buckle up. All right. Let's continue with Tolentino. On the subject of communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, he supports Francis's approach in Amoris Laetitia, which some say allows for communion for divorced and remarried Catholics under certain conditions. I say it allows it for under any condition the bishop who's implementing it lets happen, because the document is written so ambiguously. You saw some bishops in the aftermath of Amoris Laetitia saying, oh, this doesn't contradict church teaching. And there you go. Others allowing it for just completely just blowing apart the church's teaching on this subject. Tolentino views all of this as an expression of the church's mercy, emphasizing the need to accompany those in complex marital situations. He has stated that the church must be a place of welcome for those wounded by disastrous marital experiences or in new families, reflecting a pastoral rather than legalistic approach. This pastoral approach allows for sacrilegious communion. According to everything the church has said since the apostolic era until Amoris Laetitia, this is an allowance for sacrilegious Holy Communion, meaning you're facilitating these people for eating and drinking their own condemnation. On the subject of ecumenical dialogue, he's not involved in this stuff himself directly, but you can see the same underlying logic of Francis's approach, or worse, reflected in his commitment to culture and spiritual openness. He has an anthology book called The Prayer of Men. It includes prayers from diverse traditions, including African animism, Amazonian tribes, Judaism, and the Crescent Moon followers and their false prophet, which his supporters say shows his appreciation for universal spiritual insights. His friendship with people of different religions and Christian denominations, as well as his engagement with secular art and literature, demonstrates a dialogical approach that aligns with ecumenical principles. In other words, everything he does is in line with what Francis has said. He just hasn't focused on it. And we get to his relationship with Pope Francis here. Let's go to LifeSite. This is an older article, one cited by Ann Barnhart from 2018. Headline: Pope Francis chooses priest to guide Lent retreat who holds Jesus didn't establish rules. Father Mendoza wrote a glowing intro to a book on feminist theology by a pro-Molochian sacrifice, James Martin type activist nun. Jesus didn't establish rules, this now Cardinal tells us. Again, this is based on the Remnant Report, that there are two factions forming up, one around this guy, Supich, McElroy, and Hollerich, rallying around him, and everyone else basically rallying around Parolin. Now, I know Parolin had his health scare yesterday. That doesn't mean he's out of this. And Parolin does have a backup in case his candidacy for one reason or another doesn't work out. But let's go over this. In the introduction to the satanic nun's work, Tolentino tells the reader that Jesus didn't leave any rules or laws to mankind. An idea that he approvingly applies to for God's critical theology. So if you ever see any subject of study, history, literature, sociology, political science, whatever it is, anything in the broader umbrella of the liberal arts or social sciences, and has the prefix critical attached to it, what it means is everything you know is wrong, and we're going to show you how looking at it through essentially a Marxist lens can show you the truth of the matter. That's critical anything. This is critical theology. The church has told us that Jesus left us laws and rules. The Bible shows that he left us laws and rules. He didn't come to abolish the old law. He came to fulfill it. The perfection of the old law. But he's also gave us the ultimate law, the law, which, I mean, To say he doesn't leave any laws is just absurd on its face. And this is him. This is this cardinal in his own words. He says, Sister Teresa Forcades y Vila reminds of that which is essential. The Jesus of Nazareth did not codify, nor did he establish rules. Writes Tolentino, Jesus lived. That is, he constructed an ethos of relation, somatized the poetry of his message in the visibility of his flesh, expressed his own body as a premise. If he becomes Pope, you're going to see this kind of nonsensical language, this quasi-intellectual language, just that will be nearly impossible for a normal person to understand all through for the next decade, maybe longer. Because here's the other thing. He's relatively young. He's apparently 59 years old. In 2005, Francis nearly became Pope. He passed away at the age of 88. He would have been 68, give or take, during that conclave. Can you imagine Francis for 20 years on the throne of Peter? Now think about this guy, 59, with the resources of the papacy. You're looking at a quarter century, maybe longer. That's probably the biggest obstacle he has to becoming Pope, is the appetite for a younger Pope is probably not there. But if Parolin has bothered enough of these people enough, or maybe his association with Cardinal Sarah and Burke as an unlikely alliance could drive people there. A lot of people assume that, Cardinal Sarah and Burke are well loved. They're very divisive figures in the hierarchy, as is any cardinal or bishop or priest who challenged Pope Francis, who criticized him publicly. It's a complex game. Again, we don't know who's going to emerge on the loggia. Point being here, this figure says that Jesus didn't give us rules, and he's a gigantic advocate for sins that cry out to heaven for justice. More on his relationship with Francis. He enjoyed a close and trusted relationship with the now departed man, recognized universally as Pope, who famously called him the poetry in the College of Cardinals, elevating him in 2019. Francis selected Tolentino to lead the 2018 Lenten retreat from the Roman Curia, a high-profile role that showcased his theological and spiritual depth, according to his supporters, before Vatican leaders. His appointment to key Vatican roles, including prefect of the Dicastery for Culture and Education, reflects Francis's confidence in his ability to bridge faith and culture. His contributions to Francis's speeches, such as during World Youth Day 2023 in Lisbon, highlights his influence. Tolentino shares Francis's vision of a merciful, outward-looking church, and his defense of Francis against conservative critics underscores his loyalty. He has noted Francis's ability to handle opposition with humor and sees his pontificate as a continuation of Vatican II's legacy, not a radical departure. That's key. Again, people didn't believe, for whatever reason, a lot of people didn't, when those of us would say that Francis wasn't a break from Vatican II, he was a logical outcome of it. His entire faction hadn't really held the papacy until after Benedict. Because there were two factions after Vatican II. After every revolution, you get typically two factions that emerge, and they start butting heads. Sometimes, depending on the kind of revolution you're talking about, the way they butt heads could get pretty ugly pretty quick. But in the church, there were two factions, right? And it was Communio, and I can never remember the name of the other one, but one of them was the Ratzingerian faction. This was the hermeneutic of continuity faction, the Wojtyła, Ratzinger, those men who would give you a more conservative expression of Vatican II. On the other side, you had the Walter Caspers, Bernardins, and now Supiches and those kind. Tolentino among them. Francis, who pushed a more radical version. Francis was the logical outcome of this. Tolentino would be a continuation of that if he got in. And that is something to remember here, because this is a dangerous, dangerous cardinal. He is celebrated for his intellectual rigor, his poetic sensibility, meaning he will be able to communicate heresies to people in a way that sounds beautiful. And he is celebrated for his ability to engage secular culture, earning accolades like the 2020 Premio Europa Helen Vaz de Silva, sorry for my pronunciation, for spreading cultural heritage. His progressive leanings have drawn criticism from conservative and traditionalist types. Again, we go back to the Abbe Claude Barth, labeling him a fake centrist, accusing him of promoting a post-Catholic agenda that dilutes doctrine in favor of secular values. His association with controversial figures like Sister Forcades, the lady who has been accused of witchcraft, has fueled perceptions of heterodoxy, particularly on issues of sins of the flesh. The biggest downside to him being a papal candidate, besides the fact that he is clearly a Francis II, even if he never takes that name, is that he's 59 years old. Meaning if he's the one who emerges on the loggia, buckle up. You're in for a ride of a lifetime that will last the lifetime of most people watching this, judging from my statistics. If he got in today and lasts for 25 years, I would be 70 by the time the next conclave happened, probably, short of other things that can happen. Larry Globerg says, one prophecy I read is that the next pope will be conservative and will be exiled. Well, if it's some current person running around, there's a million of them all saying different things. I do not ever recommend people pay attention to contemporary figures who are still living, who are giving alleged prophecies. They're not vetted. They could be making things up, or they could be diabolically deluded. There's another prophecy out there from centuries ago that talked about two worm-ridden popes, back-to-back anti-popes, during the spiritual chastisement leading to the material chastisement. Do I think it's possible that Francis's Bergoglian actions may have had a scared straight effect on Mueller? I think that's a distinct possibility. For those of you who don't know what he's referring to, 10 years ago, people treated Cardinal Gerhard Mueller the way we treat Tobin, okay, or the way we treat McElroy. Very intelligent, modernist, kind of a progressive modernist. But then over the course of the Francis papacy, you could clearly see him shifting, that things had gone too far for him. And now he's considered a conservative. I'm not one who would be thrilled if Mueller stepped out on the loggia, because I don't know which Mueller we'd get. But there's a distinct possibility that seeing these ideas play out in real time may have shifted his perspective enough. We don't know. And I'm not trying to judge Cardinal Mueller. I'm just giving you the facts of how he was perceived. There are things he said theologically that were troubling, and a lot of those are making the rounds these days because there's a conclave going on. Is Erdo Roman? No. Erdo is, I think he's Hungarian, isn't he? He's one who they talk about as a conservative candidate, but there are so few conservative cardinals that you're going to have a hard time winning over moderates. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. It could very well happen. We will see. The same problem for Pizzaballa, by the way, although he's generally considered more papabile than of the conservative cardinals. It seems like he's considered the most papabile, but who knows? Okay, got a Protestant in here trying to be silly, so bye now. Let's keep going. I will tell you, one of the things I find fascinating watching all this. What do I think of the Padre Pio prophecy? Which one? There are so many prophecies attributed to Padre Pio. Many of them done so in his lifetime that he said were not his, that were not him, and were fake. So I don't know which Padre Pio prophecy you're referencing, if it's even a real one. It's sort of like that St. Malachi prophecy. The St. Malachi prophecy, a lot of people love, but it doesn't fit with the rest of Catholic prophecy, at least the way it's read most of the time. Plus, it's got some very sketchy origins. But I have an alternative reading for it. Maybe I'll do that tomorrow as a nice kind of break from conclave talk, because a lot of people are interested in that. But it's sort of like that. A lot of these, some of the more questionable prophecies, when read in light of other Catholic prophecies that are approved in whatever way that Vatican approves them, don't line up with other Catholic prophecies. You get a general picture when you read things from mystics going back 2,000 years, Marian apparitions and other things, that there was a material chastisement coming and a spiritual chastisement. And the spiritual chastisement is an apostasy in the church led from the top. Following that afterwards, after some time, is a material chastisement where God sort of restarts civilization or wipes the slate clean in some way. Depending how you read it, it gets pretty horrible. In other ways, it gets pretty bad, but not nearly as bad as a total wiping of the slate. Are any of these conservative strong men or all weaklings? Well, you can answer that question for yourself. And here's how you answer that question. We were promised a follow-up to the dubia, and you never got it. We got a lot of nice words from all the cardinals, everybody who watches these kind of videos typically want, about the Latin Mass and resisting Francis and things, but they always tripped over themselves to completely dismiss valid criticisms of Francis and especially of his validity as Pope. They refused to do the one thing everybody wanted them to do, which was to investigate the matter. But they didn't investigate it. They just said, no, he is definitely Pope for these reasons. And there are a lot of good critiques of that, a lot of good pushback on that, where it would have been nice if the princes of the church would have addressed them point by point and said, we looked into these things, these allegedly heretical things that Francis said or did, and here's why they're okay and why he's definitely not lost the papacy because of this, and this. I mean, you've had popes in the past say that, a pope would lose the papacy if he's uttered heretical ramblings. You had doctors of the church saying the same thing, that a man who was a known heretic could not be pope even if he was elected as such. And they refused to investigate. And so you had all these alternate hypotheses spring up. And the most you ever got from them was pushback without ever actually addressing the claims. Not a single one of them. It's why Cardinal Sarah or Cardinal Burke emerge on the Loggia, that'd be great. But would they actually do anything to fix things? Would they have the courage to do things, to fix things, knowing full well that they would create a firestorm for the duration of their papacy? Their faction is marketing themselves to the moderate cardinals who are allegedly undecided under the banner of unity, peace, that you will get a pope who will not inflame things anymore. They will tamp down all the passions going on, and they will correct errors. But in general, unity and an end of divisiveness. That doesn't sound like someone who's going to go in and start, taking a hatchet to the things Francis did, except maybe on Traditionis Custodes or Fiducia Supplicans, maybe, but not a lot of the worst things. Gabriel Rottmeister says Gugarodi could be Parolin's plan B. He is Parolin's plan B. He's just another Parolin type, a absolute Bergoglian, but is not known but has known for being more diplomatic and actually charismatic than Francis was, but not as off the deep end as the Totino and all these rest were. I'm curious though. Trish Catholic says, I think the projected firestorm is why they refuse to investigate. Exactly. They fear schism. I've seen this new thing from the traditional wing of things happening in the last few days. I had a fairly well-known traditional leaning figure contact me. Repeating this, I've seen this. There's a desire for the cardinals, the better cardinals, to take action, various different kinds of action they could take that would directly lead to schism in the church. Those same cardinals are deathly afraid of schism, even though the church has been in a state of de facto schism for the last decade, at least. You've had a traditionalist movement burgeoning up. Paul VI gave birth to the traditionalist movement. He did so by ignoring Archbishop Lefebvre, trying to sideline the SSPX, and by implementing the new mass and acting like he'd suppress the traditional mass and letting these cardinals run wild, creating a period of absolute chaos in the church that lasted from basically the late 60s to the early 80s before John Paul II did manage to restore some order in things. But the traditionalist movement was born under Paul VI. And we've been in a state of de facto schism since Francis fanned the flames that were below the surface. It wasn't the traditionalists who caused the schism. It was these people who came in and basically told us that we need a new religion that caused the schism, because they also held most of the offices, most of the power positions, telling us that Catholicism was somehow inadequate. This is a firestorm that they would create if they went after them. The question is, would it be worth it? Because we are in a de facto schism already. Are you in communion with the cardinals who stand up and talk about the new synodal church and how the mass that developed in the Latin West organically from apostolic times through 1962 was somehow inadequate for the church suddenly because the world had changed so much that the church's entire mission in the world was different and that it needed to change and to embrace the world and to stop being so divisive and instead to go along to get along with other religions when scripture and tradition and the fathers of the church and the magisterium of the church all said the opposite. When I saw Dr. Peter Kwasniewski the other day, I probably showed the screenshot of this yesterday in yesterday's live stream, talking about two religions occupying the same space. He was saying the same thing Fulton Sheen did. We talked about the ape of the church. The same thing Blessed Aunt Catherine Emmerich did, which she talked about the ape of the church, and other mystics who talked about the ape of the church, all of which involved this fake church that looked like the Catholic Church, building a facade of the new religion over the Catholic Church and trying to dismantle the real religion behind the scenes. Every mystic who talked about this said the same thing. They would fail in the end. That God would intervene. Maybe God will intervene at this conclave and give us Erdo or Pizzaballa or Cardinal Sarah. Maybe he'll give us Parolin, who will have a radical interior conversion. There were a couple of popes, preconciliar popes, who came in as fairly liberal. I hate this secular political language to describe them, but what other language do we have? They came in and were governing for a short time before they realized how bad things were in the church, and the weight of their office caused them to change radically to figures that are beloved today. This is reportedly what happened with Leo XIII and Pius IX. Pius IX was in a unique circumstance. He really was. And it could be we'll get a that'll be the kind of thing we'll get from a pope. That could be God's method for intervention. Or it could be the fulfillment of the Fatima message and the fulfillment of the third secret, whatever it is, because we never got it. Yeah, they gave us something in 2000 or 2005. Clearly was not the real thing. What's my opinion on the creepy throne of snakehead looking out of the masses at the Vatican Church? It's a bad taste, but it's not a sign of some sort of devil worship or anything. All right, let's take a look here. Thank you, Mikey Boss, for the super chats. Appreciated. Fairy Spun Fibers, thank you for becoming a channel member. Again, if you are a channel member, you get a free super chat for whatever channel you have that membership on. We give you a free one every month. Use it, please. Fairy Spun Fibers with the super chat. St. Pio's own monastery have long disclaimed that St. Pio made a prophecy involving 3 days of darkness. I wish people would quit posting that nonsense. Yeah, I actually have a video on that on my channel because early on I didn't know that it was fake. In fact, I actually asked people, what should I do with this, when I figured out that it was fake? And they all said, let's leave it up. So that's what I did. John Dillon with the super chat says, de facto schism is a great topic of discussion. We're already there. It's not something that can be avoided. The de facto schism. And we know this when they try to, if you see it in the language of Traditionis Custodes, and you see it in the language of the letter that went with it to the bishops, that they were going to push traditional Catholics with our Latin masses and a pre-Vatican II liturgy and devotionals and all the rest of it to the margins of dioceses in far away parishes where there'd be like 2 or 3 options. The entire parish is always located geographically as far from each other as possible and as out of the way locations as possible. And the point of it was to get us to return to the unitary worship of the Latin Rite, the sole expression of the Latin Rite, the Novus Ordo. And for those of you who say, well, what's so wrong with that? There was something else in that letter too. All of your reverent, conservative, extremely conservative, actually Catholic-looking Novus Ordos were on the chopping block too, because that letter explicitly said no accretions from the traditional Mass. This would mean a lot of your reverence would be gone. That was the aim. Now, that hasn't been enforced as much yet, but a Tolentino could do that. Reportedly, Cardinal Parolin hates the traditional Latin Mass and has said on the record he wants to see it abolished completely. But his deal-making with the conservative cardinals, who are apparently really scared of Tolentino and men like him from the other side, have got him to make a deal where he would back off of that. That tells you how bad of a state we're in when that kind of deal-making has got, allegedly, the better cardinals to back somebody like Parolin. Again, allegedly. Nobody knows who's going to step out on that loggia. All these stories come from the remnant's very trustworthy sources, Barate Celi's very trustworthy sources, who have a very high rate of being accurate. We're talking about outlets that reported on Traditionis Custodes coming months before it did. Outlets that talked about Fiducia Supplicans months before it happened. So they have a positive track record. So their reporting should be taken seriously. But yes, we are in a de facto state of schism. It's been there for decades, bubbling beneath the surface, made all the worse under Francis and his rhetoric. And the one thing that a lot of the cardinals want is the church to heal and have a time of peace. And if you're looking for a positive sign, that could be what results in a man like Tolentino being rejected. But a lot of it really depends, because you see people describing this in a left-right, conservative, liberal, or conservative versus progressive kind of language, as if to say, well, these are your candidates on each side. It's nonsense. Church politics does not line up neatly to American and Western parliamentary politics. It just doesn't. One of the things I'll do in the coming days is I will show you a better diagram that I found that really breaks it down. One of the categories are traditionalist cardinals. And I'm not sure how they define traditionalist, because I can't think of someone in the hierarchy who is an actual traditionalist. But there were only 5 of the cardinals who were there in that category. Just to give you an idea of why the Burkes and Syrahs would be aligning with Parolin, because there just isn't that many. Taylor Marshall, several days ago, said he went over the College of Cardinals, every single one of them, and found 18 men that would be considered very conservative or traditional. Not enough to elect a pope. But whoever gets elected might need their support, for a less bad option. He says, I could be a moderate everyone is comfortable with. Could be. We shall see. Just remember something, though. A moderate pope is going to be someone who comes in and doesn't rock the boat. You're going to see a lot of these bad figures still there. In fact, a moderate might actually go after more of the conservative cardinals or conservative bishops to get them to be quiet. Philip says, if a bad pope is elected, accepted as a Catholic, otherwise you risk developing a faith that accepts just what you agree with, God will bring about a greater good. Well, we have a duty to resist bad figures. St. Vincent of Lerins was absolutely right when he said, no matter the office they hold, you have no duty to submit to heresy. You have to resist them. He said that in the 4th century. I'll stick with him. Couldn't Vatican II be called the event of actual schism in the church? 2 churches since? Yeah, I'm not a believer that the implementation was a problem, since the same men who wrote the documents were the ones who implemented them. And they all said that the documents were written in a way with a specific kind of implementation in mind. That's one hypothesis that people hold to. I tend to think that to counter that hypothesis, you need to do a lot of serious work to counter it. I just saw a picture of the Pope holding a wooden staff with a nail through it. Do you know what that represents? I saw it. Some said it was a stang. Did he know what he was holding? I don't know. But it definitely was scandal causing 6 years ago when he did it. If the tilma is correct and B16 was the last pope, where are people getting this? The tilma gives you insight into who the last pope is going to be. I think there's a point where people are reading too much into things. Fairy Spun Fire says, we've been in schism since Vatican II. I know people don't like to hear that, but they have been in schism soon after. I mean, there are a lot of normal people who just want to be Catholic, who follow what the hierarchy says because they believe that they are God-sent people who will not lead them astray. That is the Stonecutter way of corrupting the church. It's the devil's way of doing it, is to get wicked men in high positions where they can then lead further souls astray. Father Michel Rodriguez saw Cardinal Taglay in the white papal garb. Has Father Rodriguez been right about anything? Not to be provocative here, but he said a lot of things that didn't turn out to be accurate at all. Remind me if Taglay emerges in the Loggia next week or the week after, and I'll redact that statement on this case. But so remind me. That's not an offhanded thing. Remind me, and I will do it. But Father Rodriguez has said a lot of things that didn't come to pass. So you should be careful with anybody who has a reputation of being a prophet today. The more that somebody says something that you want to hear, be careful. And I tell this to people, and especially in the secular political realm. If there's a politician out there who you are inclined to trust because they say the things that you agree with, you should be distrustful of them so you don't get manipulated. A person with your opposite political opinions is never going to be able to manipulate you too well, except maybe into sin. But it's the one who you're more inclined to agree with that you need to be careful of. And the same is true in commentary online, in people who are allegedly mystics and having prophetic visions, or prelates in the church. I'm not trying to sow a hermeneutic of suspicion here. It's just that a lot of people can engage in a lot of self-aggrandizement, even if they're not intending to. Raven Ray Taglay again. He's mentioned nonstop here in the Philippines. I'm getting sick of it. Well, he's from the Philippines. That's why. Thankfully, no one in the United States, except for a couple people I know, are really mentioning any of the American Cardinals except Prevost. He's another kind of a modernist, but he would have good managerial skills at least. New media news, count your blessings if you remember and practice your traditional Catholic spirituality, a blessing that is immensely valuable. Yes. If you want a good guide stone for navigating these days in the church, read books published before 1950. That's a good way to do it. Read Catholic books published from about that time. Yeah, there were trouble books before then. But in general, books on Catholic spirituality and what the church teaches and things from before then are going to be your sure guide stone. Anything the church faces today, any question can be addressed by reading old books. You don't need an encyclical on care for our common home to figure out how the church should be addressing that issue. Brian Benson, people like Robert Barron appear to be conservative, but he's a modernist. We need somebody Catholic. Well, Bishop Robert Barron has no chance of being Pope this go around. Who knows? The next Pope may make him an Archbishop somewhere and then a Cardinal after that. And then he might have a chance. And he would be another one of those rhetorically gifted men who could have at least some of the public relations skills needed to be Pope. All right, folks. I'm curious what else you have to say about all this, so let me know in the comments, please. Choose one of those novenas that all the better bishops and cardinals are promoting. They all have the same essential intention for a good and holy Pope. My general intention is for whatever is God's will, his active will, or his permissive will. Either way, whatever it is when it comes to this conclave. Because it could be that we are still a wicked and depraved enough generation that we are deserving of further chastisement. Nobody wants to hear that. But remember what the Fatima, reportedly, what the Fatima Third Secret is actually. According to cardinals who said they read it, and other figures who all said they were in the room when it was read out loud. They were sworn to secrecy on the specific contents, but they did all say the same thing, that a detailed an apostasy in the church led from the top. Are we out of that yet? Who knows? Pray that God's will be done on this and that men listen to the guidance of the Holy Spirit. From there, it's in God's hands. Always, always remember that this is not merely the machinations of men trying to impose their will on the church, that God is a player in this and that God's will can be done if the cardinals listen to it. Good things will happen if we listen to the will of God. Good life rule. Anyway, enough rambling for now. As always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.